You are sitting right now watching this video and you believe you know what is real. You look at the screen in front of you and think you understand the difference between the digital world and the physical world, between what is authentic and what is fabricated, between your own mind and the technologies that surround it. But what if I told you that this distinction, so clear to you at this moment, will be completely dissolved in less than a decade? I'm not talking about a gradual change that you can choose to accept or reject. I'm talking about a transformation so radical of the very nature of human experience that in 7 years, when you look around, the reality you perceive will be fundamentally different from what we've known for millennia. And what's most disturbing is that this change won't be imposed by some authoritarian government or external force. It will emerge naturally from the convergence of technologies that already exist today, just waiting to mature and merge in ways that most of us still can't imagine. I'm going to show you why every aspect of your life, from how you perceive other people to how you understand your own consciousness, will be unrecognizable in less time than it takes for a child to finish elementary school. Before we dive into the approaching future, we need to understand what really happened in the last 20 years, because most people still haven't grasped the magnitude of the first digital revolution. In 2005, Facebook barely existed, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, and the idea that billions of people would carry powerful devices connected to a global network of instant information seemed distant. Today, just 2 decades later, reality has already changed profoundly, but so gradually that we adapted without noticing. Think about how you relate to other people now. How many of your friends do you actually see in person regularly? How many of your conversations happen through text messages where you never hear the person's tone of voice, never see their complete facial expressions, only interact with a filtered and edited textual representation of them? Your romantic relationships probably begin in apps where you make decisions about human compatibility based on a few carefully selected photos and short phrases. Your work, if you work in any area that isn't purely physical, happens largely through screens. In virtual meetings where you see two-dimensional versions of your colleagues, often with filters that smooth their imperfections. Even your most precious memories are increasingly mediated by technology. How many times have you experienced an important moment through your phone screen because you were recording for social media? How many of your memories are really your direct experiences versus the photos and videos you revisit later? This digital mediation of life has already profoundly altered what it means to be human, but we accepted it because it happened incrementally. Each small change seemed harmless. Trading letters for emails, trading phone calls for messages, trading in-person meetings for video calls. Each step seemed just a matter of convenience, of efficiency, of natural progress. But the cumulative effect is that we already live in a partially synthetic reality where our most important experiences are filtered through algorithms and digital interfaces. And here's the crucial part that most people don't realize. We're only at the beginning of this transformation. What happened in the last 2 decades is the equivalent of the first steam cars of the 19th century. Slow, clumsy, clearly inferior to horses in many ways, but containing within them the seeds of a revolution that would change all of civilization. The technologies emerging now in 2025 are the equivalents of Henry Ford's Model T, still primitive in many senses, but about to become ubiquitous and completely transform the landscape of human reality at a speed that will make the Industrial Revolution seem slow. Let's talk specifically about what's coming. The artificial intelligence that exists today, however impressive it may seem, is still primitive. Language models can converse convincingly, but lack persistent memory, true long-term contextual understanding, complex reasoning capacity comparable to human in all dimensions. AIs that generate images and videos still have noticeable flaws, small imperfections that reveal their synthetic nature. But all of this is changing at exponential speed. In 7 years, you'll have access to a personal AI that will know you better than any human being could ever know you. It will have perfect memory of every conversation you had with it, every preference you expressed, every emotion you demonstrated. It will understand the subtle patterns of your behavior that you yourself don't perceive. It will know when you're stressed by the way you type. It will predict your needs before you articulate them. And most importantly, it will be designed with a single objective: to keep you engaged, satisfied, dependent. Not out of malice, but because that's how it was programmed by the companies that created it, companies whose business model depends on capturing and monetizing your attention. This AI won't be just a helpful assistant you consult occasionally. It will be a constant presence, integrated into every aspect of your life. When you wake up in the morning, it will have already organized your day based on what it knows about your commitments, your priorities, and even your emotional state, inferred from your sleep patterns and physical activity monitored during the night. When you leave home, it will guide every decision. Which route to take to work, considering not just traffic, but also places where you can stop that align with your interests and needs of the moment. Who you should interact with based on predictive analysis of which relationships will be most beneficial for your personal and professional goals. What you should eat, precisely calculating your optimal nutrition based on your activity levels and health goals. Seems convenient, doesn't it? It even seems liberating to have someone managing all these tedious decisions so you can focus on what really matters. But here's the disturbing question. If an AI is making all these small decisions for you, who is really living your life? At what point do your autonomy and your identity become indistinguishable from the constant recommendations and guidance of an algorithmic system? Now combine that omnipresent AI with the other technologies that will be mature in 7 years. Augmented reality that no longer requires bulky glasses, but is integrated into contact lenses or projected directly onto your retina through tiny devices. You'll walk the streets and see a completely different reality from the person next to you. Not just additional information overlaid on the physical world, but a complete transformation of how you perceive the environment. Stores that appear highlighted to you with personalized offers, people with information markers floating above their heads, showing their social profiles, shared interests with you, even trustworthiness ratings based on social analysis algorithms. Urban space itself will be malleable, with buildings and streets gaining layers of meaning and appearance that exist only in the digital domain, but are as vividly perceived as anything physical. Two people can be looking at exactly the same place and see completely different worlds, parallel realities, customized to their preferences and personal histories. And this brings us to one of the most profound and disturbing implications of this transformation: the end of shared reality throughout all of human history. No matter how different people's beliefs, values, or cultures were, there was always a common substrate of experience. Everyone saw the same sun, the same moon, the same mountains and rivers. This shared physical reality was the foundation upon which all other differences could be negotiated. You could disagree about religion, politics, morality, but at least you agreed on basic facts of the physical world. Someone died or didn't die, an event happened or didn't happen. An object exists or doesn't exist. But when each person lives in a personalized augmented reality bubble, when each information feed is algorithmically filtered to confirm existing beliefs, when even photographic and video evidence can be perfectly fabricated by AI, this common ground disappears. There will no longer be objective truth accessible to everyone. There will only be multiple competing narratives, each sustained by perfectly convincing synthetic evidence, and the choice between them will be based not on correspondence with reality, but on which narrative resonates best with your tribe, your identity, your emotions. Think about what this means for politics, for science, for justice. How do you resolve disputes when the parties don't even agree on the basic facts of what happened? How do you conduct scientific research when data can be fabricated indistinguishably from real data? How do you judge crimes when surveillance videos can be perfectly faked? The emerging answer seems to be through centralized authority. When there are no longer verifiable objective facts, power passes to whoever controls the AI and augmented reality platforms that mediate all perception. These technology companies will become the final arbiters of truth, not through direct coercion, but simply because they control the filters through which billions of people experience reality. If Google's or Apple's or Microsoft's AI decides that a certain event happened in a certain way and presents convincing synthetic evidence to millions of users, that becomes functional truth for those people, regardless of what actually happened in the physical world. But the transformation goes even deeper to the very nature of human consciousness and identity. In the next 7 years, we'll see the first commercially viable brain-computer interfaces. Not the invasive experimental versions that exist today, but non-invasive devices that can read neural signals with enough precision to allow direct control of digital systems through thought. Initially, this will be sold for benign use cases. People with disabilities recovering mobility. Gamers controlling games with their minds. Professionals accessing information instantly without needing to type or speak. But once the technology is established, once it's convenient and socially accepted, the next step will be inevitable. Not just sending information from the brain to computers, but receiving information from computers directly into the brain. Synthetic thoughts and memories indistinguishable from natural ones. Externally induced emotions, Perceptions that don't correspond to any real sensory stimulus, but are experienced with total vividness. Imagine what happens when you can no longer trust your own memories because you don't know if they're really yours or were implanted digitally. When you feel emotions that may have been induced by algorithms designed to manipulate your behavior. When your thoughts may include subliminal suggestions inserted by your personal AI to guide you in certain directions. At this point, the distinction between you and the technology surrounding you disappears completely. You're no longer using tools. The tools are merging with your mind. Your identity becomes an inseparable hybrid of biological processes and digital processes. And the question no one can answer is, what's left of the human being when this happens? Does an authentic you still exist in there? Or do you simply become a node in a vast network of hybrid human artificial intelligence? I need to stop for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this technological future we're discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? Do you lie awake at night thinking about this too? I know we often keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps for fear of seeming paranoid or technophobic in a world that celebrates every new innovation without questioning. But your concerns are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. My biggest fear about our technological future is followed by what really worries you. Your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine paths to face them. Now, it would be easy to end here with an apocalyptic vision of total loss of humanity. But that would be an incomplete analysis, because we also need to recognize that each of these technologies brings genuinely transformative possibilities to improve the human condition. The same AI that can manipulate can also heal. The same augmented reality that can imprison in bubbles can also expand our perception beyond biological limits. The same brain-computer interfaces that can control can also liberate people with disabilities and expand the cognitive capacities of all humanity. The problem isn't the technologies themselves, but the social and economic context in which they're being developed and deployed. We live in a system where technological innovation is driven primarily by corporate profit and geopolitical competition. The companies developing AI and augmented reality don't ask what's best for humanity. They ask what will generate more engagement, more data, more revenue. The governments funding brain-computer interface research don't prioritize human flourishing. They prioritize military advantage and population control. And all of us, as users and consumers, are complicit because we accept each new technological convention without deeply questioning its long-term implications. The fundamental question we face isn't whether these technologies will exist in 7 years, because they certainly will. The question is whether we'll develop social wisdom and ethical structures to guide their use before it's too late. And here's the scary part. We probably won't. History repeatedly shows that humanity develops technological capabilities much faster than wisdom to use them. We created nuclear weapons before developing robust international systems to prevent their use. We created social networks and recommendation algorithms before understanding their psychological and social impact. We created ubiquitous digital surveillance before establishing meaningful protections for privacy. There's no reason to believe it will be different with AI, augmented reality, and brain-computer interfaces. These technologies will be deployed on a global scale before we truly understand their consequences, and then we'll spend decades trying to mitigate the damage while fighting against massive corporate and state interests that profit from the status quo. So what do we do in the face of this inevitability as individuals, as a society, as a species? The answer can't simply be to reject technology and try to return to some idealized past, because that path isn't available. Technological change is like climate change in this sense. You can be against it, but that won't stop it from happening. The economic and competitive forces driving innovation are too powerful to be stopped by any individual country or movement. If Silicon Valley stops developing advanced AI, China will continue. If both somehow agree to pause, researchers in dozens of other countries will continue. Technology advances not because humanity collectively decides it's wise to advance, but because the individual incentives of specific actors inexorably lead them in that direction. So total rejection isn't a realistic option. But uncritical acceptance shouldn't be either. The path, if one exists, is in developing what we can call existential literacy for the technological age. What I mean by this is the ability to consciously navigate these transformations while maintaining some sense of agency, identity, and fundamental values. This begins with understanding you can't resist or adapt to forces you don't understand. So the first step is deep education, not just about how technologies work technically, but about their philosophical, psychological, and social implications. This means thinking seriously about questions that may seem abstract, but will become terribly concrete very soon. What does authenticity mean in a world of AI-mediated perception? How do you maintain genuine relationships when every interaction is filtered through digital interfaces? Where do you draw personal boundaries about how much technological intrusion you accept in your mind and life? These aren't questions you can delegate to experts or corporations or governments. They're existential questions that each individual needs to confront and answer for themselves. Beyond understanding, we need deliberate practices of preserving the human. Just as in a world of ultra-processed foods, people who want to be healthy need to make conscious choices about nutrition, in a world of digitally ultra-processed experiences, people who want to maintain some connection with unmediated reality will need to make conscious choices. This might mean regular periods completely disconnected from all digital technology, not just turning off notifications, but being truly offline without access to AIs, without augmented reality, without digital interfaces of any kind. For many, this will seem as radical as prolonged fasting seems today, but it may be equally essential for psychological health. It might mean deliberately seeking experiences and relationships not mediated by technology. Face-to-face conversations without devices present. Walks in nature without maps or apps. Artistic creation with physical materials. Not because technology is inherently bad, but because human experience needs balance and the tendency of our era is profoundly imbalanced toward the digital. But these individual practices, however important they are, aren't enough. We also need systemic change, and here the situation is more complicated. As I mentioned, the forces driving technological development are massive and global, but they're not completely uncontrollable. History shows that societies can, in fact, regulate and shape technological development when there's sufficient political will. We ban certain weapons. We regulate dangerous industries. We created safety standards for vehicles, chemicals, medicines. The problem with AI and related technologies is that we haven't yet developed social consensus on what constitutes safe versus dangerous use. And in the absence of that consensus, in the absence of effective regulation, companies optimize for short-term profit, which generally means maximizing engagement and data collection without much consideration for long-term consequences. We need a wave of technological activism that forces these issues to the center of political discourse. Just as the environmental movement eventually made climate change and pollution central political issues, we need a movement that makes AI governance, protection of cognitive autonomy, and preservation of shared reality central political issues. This means pushing for legislation that limits certain types of algorithmic manipulation. That requires transparency about how AIs make decisions that affect human lives, that establishes fundamental rights about mental and cognitive integrity, that creates public spaces free from ubiquitous commercial surveillance, that guarantees that at least some domains of human experience remain uncolonized by algorithmic optimization and monetization. These aren't utopian ideas. They're practical necessities for maintaining a functional civilization and meaningful human experience in the era that's approaching. But even with the best individual practices and the best public policies, we still face the fundamental reality that the nature of human experience is changing in ways we can't completely control. And perhaps instead of just resisting this, we also need to try to imagine the positive possibilities that may emerge, because if it's true that in 7 years reality will be unrecognizable, that means we have a unique opportunity in human history, an opportunity to rebuild fundamental aspects of human experience more intentionally and consciously. For millennia, our ancestors lived with the constraints of evolutionary biology and physics of the natural world. These constraints shaped everything about how we are, from our life expectancy to our cognitive capacities to the nature of our social relations. Now, for the first time, these constraints are becoming negotiable. And yes, this brings immense risks of losing what's essential about being human, but it also brings possibilities of transcending limitations that have always caused immense suffering. Think about chronic pain, which affects billions of people and has no adequate cure. In 7 years, neural interfaces may modulate pain perception directly, offering genuine relief without the devastating side effects of opioids. Think about mental illnesses like severe depression and anxiety. AI that truly understands individual neural patterns can offer personalized interventions infinitely more effective than the one-size-fits-all approaches we use today. Think about communication barriers between cultures and languages. Augmented reality with perfect real-time translation can finally create genuine understanding between people who could never communicate before, think about educational limitations. Personalized tutor AI can give every child on the planet the equivalent of a world-class private teacher in every subject. These possibilities aren't science fiction. They're direct applications of technologies that already exist in primitive form and will be mature in less than a decade. The question is whether we'll realize these positive possibilities, or if we'll only realize the dystopias that are equally possible. And the answer depends less on the technology itself and more on our social and political choices, on the wisdom and vigilance we bring to this unique historical moment. Because we need to understand this isn't just another cycle of technological innovation like the many that came before. This is a transformation of a different order. Agriculture changed where we lived and how we organized societies. Writing changed how we transmitted knowledge across generations. The printing press changed who had access to information. The internet changed the speed and reach of communication. Each of these revolutions was profound. But what's coming now is change in the very nature of human consciousness and perception. It's change not just in what we do or how we live, but in what we are at a fundamental level. And here we arrive at the central paradox that may be impossible to resolve. To navigate this transformation with wisdom, we would need a deep understanding of ourselves, of what's essential about being human, of what can be changed without losing something fundamental, of which values should guide our technological choices. But technology is changing so fast that we don't have time to develop that understanding. We are being forced to make choices about the future of human experience before we truly understand what we're choosing between. It's like asking someone to redesign their own psyche while their psyche is being altered by the redesign process. There's no fixed viewpoint, no stable foundation from which to make objective judgments. We're all inside the transformation, being transformed by it, and therefore can't really see it clearly. But perhaps it's precisely this condition of uncertainty and transformation that defines what it means to be human at this moment. Not having clear answers, not being able to see the future sharply, being suspended between worlds, between a way of being that's disappearing and another that hasn't yet taken complete form. Our ancestors lived in relatively stable worlds where the certainties their parents knew would remain true for their children. But we live in an era of accelerated metamorphosis, where the only certainty is continuous change. And perhaps whatever is essential about humanity has to be something that can persist through this change. Not specific biological characteristics that can be augmented or replaced, not particular modes of thought that can be replicated by AI, but something more fundamental. The capacity to ask questions about meaning and purpose, the capacity to care for other beings, the capacity to create and appreciate beauty, the capacity to fight for justice even when it's not personally advantageous. If these capacities can persist and even flourish in the hybrid reality that's emerging, then perhaps the essence of humanity can survive the transformation even if everything else changes. So yes, in 7 years, you won't recognize the reality around you. The perceptual, social, and cognitive landscape of human life will have been altered in ways that are difficult to fully imagine now. But the question isn't whether we can prevent this change, because we can't. The question is what kind of humans we want to be within this new reality, what values we want to preserve, what capacities we want to develop, what kind of society we want to build with these powerful new tools. And these are questions that can't be answered by experts or algorithms or corporations. They're questions that require conscious participation from all of us, deep reflection on what really matters, and willingness to fight for a vision of the future that honors the best of what it means to be human, while embracing the genuine possibilities of transcendence that technology offers. If these reflections touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that we'll face this uncertain future better together in honest dialogue than isolated in our own bubbles of anxiety and confusion. The future I've described may seem inevitable, and in many ways it is. But within that inevitability, there's room for agency, for choice, for shaping the details of how the transformation unfolds. And it's these details that will determine whether the next phase of human existence will be a glorious expansion of our capacities or a tragic diminishment of our humanity. The answer isn't predetermined. It's being decided now in every choice we make about how we use technology, in every conversation we have about values and priorities, in every time we choose genuine human connection over digital convenience. The world 7 years from now is already being built today. And all of us are architects of that world, whether we want to be or not, whether we're conscious of it or not. The only question is whether we'll be conscious architects, working intentionally to create a reality that honors our deepest values, or whether we let commercial forces and technological imperatives shape that reality for us without our participation or consent.
How do you see the future for humans?
That's a big question. We don't know. Nobody has any idea how the world would look like in 50 years or even 20 years, because it depends on our decision. One of the biggest dangers is that our own creations will get out of our control and will enslave or annihilate us. The very term AI, people think of it as an acronym for artificial intelligence, but with each passing year, AI is becoming less and less artificial. By artificial, we mean something that we design and control. Yes, we write the code, but it's the first technology in history that can create new ideas by itself. So it's not really a tool, it's more like an agent. And just imagine the situation in a couple of years when the world or society is populated by millions, perhaps billions, of these new alien intelligences, creating not just text and video and art, but creating new financial devices, new weapons, even new religions. Most of the information in the world is fiction. If we want to get to the truth,
we need to make a special effort. We need special institutions like the media, like universities, like research centers, that they make the special effort, or like courts. In a court of law, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get to the truth. I hear a lot of people who say that no, we just need to release all barriers to the flow of information, and the truth will automatically rise to the surface. Exactly the opposite happens. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom under all this ocean of fantasy and fiction and lies.
Information is the food of the mind. More information is always good for you. That's ridiculous.
You think a lot about these topics, and how do you protect yourself against the negative consequences of AI?
There are two main things. One is to get to know my own mind as well as I can. Because all these manipulations, they work by getting to know and exploit our own weaknesses. It's the oldest advice in the book. Get to know yourself better. The second thing is to keep some kind of an information diet. Lots of people have a food diet. They are very mindful of what they eat, which is important. You know, you don't want to eat too much, it's not good for you. You don't want to eat junk food, it's not good for you. It's the same with information. Information is the food of the mind. The idea that more information is always good for you, that's ridiculous. It's like thinking that more food is always good for you. Not true. And similarly, you have to be very mindful what kind of information you're putting into your mind. If you feed your mind constantly with outrage and anger and fear, you'll get a sick mind. So you have to be very careful. Also very important, like with food, you need time to digest. Time when you don't take in more information. That's it for now, and now I need to digest.